In Part 1 of America Burns, the unthinkable happened. On January 6, rioters stormed the Capitol and took senators, including Vice President Mike Pence, hostage. The world watched in horror as chaos erupted, with Nancy Pelosi's shocking assassination being live-streamed, leaving a nation in grief and disbelief. President Trump stood silent, refusing to condemn the attack, igniting a wave of riots unprecedented in their scale. Then, in a stunning last-ditch move on January 7, Trump declared martial law, desperately trying to stay in power. Now America stands on the brink. Will the military turn against Trump or stand by his side? Can he actually hold on to power? And where on earth is Joe Biden in all this madness? Buckle up for part 2, as the chaos has only just begun. Before we begin, let me briefly ask you to subscribe so you don't miss the next parts in this series. Also, a quick disclaimer, like the last part, this video is not politically motivated. It's meant to be fun and entertaining, nothing more and nothing less. I hope you enjoy the scenario and be aware that it's not 100% realistic. My goal was to create an interesting timeline, not a perfectly realistic one. Also, I hope it goes without saying, but I don't want to incite any violence with this video. Now with that out of the way, let's quickly catch up to current events. After nationwide riots broke out as a response to the insurrection, Trump knew that in order to stay in power, he needed to declare martial law. However, before Trump declared martial law, he invoked the Insurrection Act. He didn't do so because he necessarily wanted to, but because immediately declaring martial law would have been risky. After all, Trump doesn't want it to look like a coup. In our timeline, members of the Oath Keepers had actual plans to bring more weapons into the Capitol if Trump invoked the Insurrection Act, which he never did in our time. However, their plans quickly fell flat in this timeline. By the time Trump declared the Insurrection Act, the Capitol is completely surrounded by the National Guard. Inside the Capitol, Enrique Tarrio is in control of the situation. The countless insurgents follow his command and Tarrio himself directly follows the words of Donald Trump. Shortly before Trump declared martial law, Tarrio negotiated for a direct military line of communication between him and Trump in exchange for 5 senators. Together they began to plan for how they can remove the senators out of DC so Trump can trial them. Do they actually have a chance of securing DC, or will the National Guard present turn on Donald Trump? We will soon find out, but first let's take a look on how the public, military and world reacts to the declaration of martial law. On January 7 at 11:25 a.m., Donald Trump stepped onto the White House grounds and formally declared martial law in a speech. He claims that martial law is necessary to defend the integrity of the American democracy. He again makes claims about widespread voter fraud and would use the nationwide riots as justification. He blames left-wing radicals for inciting the violence and for being responsible for the death of Nancy Pelosi. Trump is quoted saying both, "I promise swift action to reclaim control," and "Patriots need to stand firm." These phrases further pour oil into the fire as the nation begins to completely divide itself. Immediately after his speech, Trump, with the help of his advisors, would suspend habeas corpus. In practice, that means that anyone can now be arrested without the need for a charge. This would give Trump the power to arrest political opponents, members of Congress, journalists, activists, and basically anyone who's opposing him. Trump will soon use this power to declare that the capture of the senators, including Mike Pence, was lawful. He orders the military in Washington, D.C. to stand down and shortly after, in private, tells Enrique Tarrio to wait for further instructions as the situation develops. The military initially abides Trump's order to stand down in D.C. However, voices inside the National Guard present at the Capitol whisper about plans to remove Trump from power. Joe Biden, meanwhile, is quickly made aware about the danger. During the declaration of martial law, Biden was staying in Washington, D.C. However, now with the situation rapidly deteriorating, he and his cabinet moved to an undisclosed location in Delaware, his home state. They're still in close proximity to D.C., but now in a firm blue area that is far safer. Of course, neither Donald Trump nor the world know at this point where they are located. Less than an hour after the speech, the US is already in complete chaos. Both traditional media and social media are completely up in flames. Conservative media outlets like Fox News back Donald Trump and blame Mike Pence, Joe Biden, and practically all Democrats for the current chaos. More progressive media outlets like CNN and MSNBC push for a different narrative. They call Trump's action a coup and call for the military to disobey his orders and arrest him. As you can imagine, social media on January 7 would be a total hellscape. Thanks to the powers granted by martial law, Donald Trump can order the shutdown of any social media he wants. However, as you probably know, tech giants like Facebook, Twitter, and Google are traditionally progressive, with their headquarters in democratic states like California and Washington. So, social media sites like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook resist Trump's call and instead ban accounts linked to him. In return, the Trump administration uses their power to try to shut down Twitter and co. in many regions across the US. You can expect that in red states like Texas and Florida, Twitter will be banned within hours. A cat and mouse game between Trump's administration and tech giants erupts, leading to countless banned accounts, removed content, cyber attacks, and entire social media blackouts. In rural areas across the continental US, Trump loyalists would begin to prepare themselves. They would quickly gather firearms, explosives, and tactical gear. Tens of thousands of rural Americans would organize into pro-Trump militia groups akin to the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. At the same time, institutions in democratic-leaning areas like major cities and states like California would begin to call Trump's action a coup. Imagine assets being frozen, countless documents seized, and so on. Also, as you've probably expected, the stock market would experience a large-scale crash. Riots against Trump in these areas would get significantly worse, with New York City being hit the hardest. Countless people would storm into the Trump Tower, completely overwhelming the officers there. While martial law was already declared, the city is in deep chaos. Also, many military officials flat out refused to stop the rioters. Anything associated with Donald Trump would be a target of the rioters, who would quickly organize themselves into groups. Imagine Fox News headquarters and similar places being stormed by anti-Trump protesters. While the right-wing rural groups organize into militias like the Proud Boys, the urban left organizes a little differently. You can expect them to use similar tactics as the Hong Kong protesters in 2020, at least in the beginning. Trump, of course, also calls for law enforcement to arrest key figures in the early opposition. He orders the FBI to arrest key Democratic officials who, in his view, participated in the election fraud. This includes key governors like Gavin Newsom and Andrew Cuomo, both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, tech CEOs like Jack Dorsey, the back then CEO of Twitter, journalists, media figures, and anti-Trump Republicans like Liz Cheney. The FBI's leader Christopher Wray and the leader of the CIA, Gina Haspel, are hesitant to follow through on Trump's order and call their agents to stand down. However, many factions within the FBI and CIA are loyal to Trump, and they try their best to follow through on his commands. After Trump gets wind about the FBI's and CIA's betrayal, he also orders the arrests of Christopher Wray and Gina Haspel. This quickly results in the FBI overthrowing Christopher Wray. They declare their full loyalty to Donald Trump as they appoint a new leader and purge anyone not loyal to Father Trump. The CIA, on the other hand, remains more staunchly anti-Trump, with Gina Haspel staying in power. After the coup, the FBI quickly begins to follow through on Donald Trump's order, and they begin to arrest journalists and media figures. However, most important politicians and individuals are completely undercover by now. Also, while the FBI is trying to arrest them, the CIA is covertly providing key intelligence to Joe Biden and other politicians. The Supreme Court tries their best to, as quickly as possible, make a ruling on the legitimacy of Trump's actions. Thanks to some handsome promises and a threat here and there, they rule in favor of Donald Trump. However, at this point, nobody really cares about their rulings anymore, as practically all law and order has left the nation. While this sounds like a lot, it all happened in a very short time span. Donald Trump declared martial law on January 7 at 11:25 a.m. Everything I mentioned by now happened before 3 p.m. the same day. As the initial dust is settling and the scale of the situation becomes clear to the world, the true factions begin to emerge. While red areas hold more resources like oil, blue areas control a large chunk of the American economy. However, the future of this conflict lies in the hands of Joe Biden and how he will respond. While the chaos was unfolding, Joe Biden got visited by several important figures in his hideout in Delaware. This includes key military officials like Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, which makes him the top military official in the US at the time. He is known for his commitment to democratic principles and the Constitution. However, his role is more advisory, and his ability to directly deploy troops is limited without the chain of command firmly on his side. Other important military officials include Michael Gilday, the Chief of Naval Operations, and General Charles Q. Brown Jr., the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Next to them, various figures from the National Guard and Special Operations also support Biden. Besides military officials, Joe Biden also consults with key politicians, mainly blue state governors like Gavin Newsom from California, Andrew Cuomo from New York, and Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan. Of course, Kamala Harris is completely standing behind Biden. In fact, her work is crucial as she's working to contact various factions in an attempt to gather further support. While Biden is busy consulting military officials and politicians, Kamala Harris consults the CIA and many tech companies. Together, Biden's coalition discussed what their best course of action is based on the current situation. To summarize, they have practically two choices. Either they can throw in the towel and flee the nation, continuing to work against Donald Trump in exile. However, as you can probably guess, Biden doesn't want to do that, and only a few advisors even seriously suggested it. Fleeing the nation now would undermine his role as the rightful president. Also, Trump's grip on power is not strong enough for Biden's team to be hopeless. Many cracks are already showing, like the defiance of tech companies, the CIA, and the widespread riots. It is also unclear by this point how loyal many individuals truly are to Trump. The other option is, of course, to resist Donald Trump in an attempt to regain power. As you can probably guess, this is what they chose. Joe Biden and practically anyone important on his side agrees that the best course for America is to end Trump's reign once and for all. Joe Biden knows that defying Donald Trump could easily lead to a full-scale civil war. Of course, neither Biden nor any of his advisors want that, but they are willing to go through with their actions if they don't have any other choice. By now, the Biden team agrees that the best first step is to appeal to US constitutions like the courts, negotiate with military leaders to ensure resource and military installations are under their control, and to gather international support. Biden appeals to NATO, the European Union and other allied nations like Canada and the UK in an attempt to gain their support. He wants them to denounce Trump's presidency, but many nations are hesitant to follow through as they fear that Biden isn't able to regain power. However, for now, Biden's next step is to address the nation. At 4 p.m. on January 7, media outlets all over the world report that Joe Biden will hold a televised speech addressing the situation in the nation at 5 p.m. Trump's administration scrambles in preparation and tries with full force to shut down media outlets like CNN. Their goal is to censor the speech as best as possible. However, in today's day and age, that's almost impossible. At exactly 5 p.m, Joe Biden goes live in front of a grey wall in an undisclosed location. His speech is viewed by millions of Americans across countless platforms. Of course, CNN, MSNBC and international news agencies like BBC broadcast it. It is also live streamed on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter and so on. On top of that, many cities publicly broadcast the speech. For example, thousands of people watch it together in Times Square. Many right-wing loyalists within blue cities use this as an opportunity to conduct terrorist attacks against the public viewings. In Times Square, several pipe bombs go off, killing over 10 people. But let's focus on the speech itself now. Joe Biden tries his best in the speech to walk a fine line between projecting strength, unity and legitimacy, while trying not to escalate the situation any further. Here's the beginning of the speech. Also forgive me for not doing a Biden impression, I'm not a good impressionist. My fellow Americans, today we find ourselves at a critical juncture in our nation's history. I come before you not as a politician, but as your elected president, a servant of the people, entrusted to uphold the values of our democracy and the Constitution that has guided us for over 2 centuries. Our country has been thrown into chaos by forces that seek to divide us, by individuals who refuse to accept the will of the people and the peaceful transfer of power, a hallmark of our republic since its founding. Let me be clear, the event unfolding are not just a threat to me or to one political party, they are a threat to all of us, to the very fabric of America. We have seen armed insurrectionists, fueled by lies and misinformation, take our leaders hostage, attack our institutions, and try to impose their will through violence and fear. But America does not bow to fear. We have faced civil war, world wars, economic depression, and terrorist attacks. And in every instance, we have come together, united by our shared belief in liberty, justice, and equality. I understand the fear and uncertainty many of you feel right now. But this is not the time to give in to division. This is not the time to turn on each other. We must stand united. We must stand for democracy. We must stand for America. Of course, this wouldn't be the whole speech. Knowing that law enforcement and the military play a crucial role in this situation, Biden would directly appeal to them. He would remind them of their oath and their duty towards democracy and the Constitution. He would also directly address Trump supporters, deliberately not alienating them, but rather trying to appeal to their sense of justice and democracy. This is a crucial step in swaying moderates who are at least somewhat skeptical about Trump's intentions. In the ending portion, Biden would directly address allies like NATO, the EU and other democracies. He calls them to support the legitimate government of the US and urges them to denounce Trump. He reminds the world how important it is for global democracies to step up and support democratic governments in the face of authoritarianism. After Biden's speech, his coalition closely observes the various reactions across the nation. The already violent anti-Trump protests gather new momentum, while Trump's camp scrambles for a coordinated response. On social media sites, various high-ranking officials and public figures announce their support for Joe Biden. This is a strong sign, since speaking up against Trump right now seems like a very risky move, especially if you're a public figure. Biden's advisors urge him that now is the right time to take the next big step. However, they know that any wrong move could further escalate the situation, and with the fear of civil war growing inside Biden's circle, their paranoia is only increasing. After several intense hours of strategizing, the Biden administration finally comes to agreement on what their next move will be. The governors of several blue states make their way to safe and undisclosed locations inside their states. They are well aware that the action they will soon take will forever change history, for the better or worse. At 8:30 p.m. on January 7, the governors of California, New York, Michigan and several other blue states simultaneously declare their open defiance against Donald Trump in a coordinated, televised address. They voice sympathy for the anti-Trump rioters in their states and order both the National Guard and other institutions within their state to not follow through on any order made by Donald Trump. They declare their full loyalty to Joe Biden, who they view as the rightful president of the United States. The move is a huge gamble, but their hope is that they just sparked a chain reaction that will result in Trump's downfall. That, however, entirely depends on how the nation will react. Only minutes later, the streets of Los Angeles, New York and many other cities erupt into celebrations. The pro-Biden demonstrators cheer, waving American flags and chanting slogans of freedom and democracy. Simultaneously, Trump loyalists within those cities brutally clash with police forces in an attempt to counter protest. The National Guard in blue states received clear instructions from their governors: ignore any orders from Washington and protect our citizens from Trump's illegal regime. Armed units of the National Guard now stand firm to defend against federal forces as they prepare for an inevitable crash. The pro-Trump protestants in blue states quickly get overwhelmed by both pro-Biden Biden protesters and the National Guard, who now practically work together. By 9 p.m. it is confirmed that federal military units are being mobilized in red states. Shortly after, in his typical style, Donald Trump reacts to the open defiance. He's being interviewed live by Fox News and is quoted saying things like, "We will take back control of these corrupt states," and "Biden and his criminal governors will not steal this country from real Americans." Shortly after the interview, the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, also declared defiance against Trump. This is significant for several reasons. First, Maryland is in close proximity to DC, and Larry Hogan is a Republican governor. However, as you can probably guess by his reaction, he was a vocal critic of Donald Trump throughout his career. For example, he neither endorsed him in 2016 or 2020. The US military seems to be split on the issue, with the Army and Marine Corps being mostly supportive of Trump, while the Air Force and Navy show strong signs of defiance, but more on that in a minute. Trump's allies in the military, led by General John H. Smith, begin to prepare to march towards DC, as the city is burning up in flames. Remember, by now the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers are still in control of the Capitol, with over 20 senators held hostage, including Mike Pence. Inside DC, the over 50,000 pro-Trump rioters are violently clashing with anti-Trump protesters. While the National Guard is present, they don't exactly help in de-escalating. Many are torn apart between their duty to the Constitution and personal support for Donald Trump. Small skirmishes inside the National Guard in DC break out between different units, with nobody having a clear overview on what's happening. Still, the majority of National Guard units in both DC and Maryland are loyal to Joe Biden, not Donald Trump, largely thanks to the fact that the governor of Maryland declared open defiance against Trump. While they are dealing with internal skirmishes and brutal rioters, the National Guard units are setting up defenses all around DC, as they are preparing for the inevitable arrival of stronger pro-Trump forces. In the meantime, Trump, with the help of the Secret Service, is covertly escorted out of DC and moved into Mar-a-Lago, his estate in Florida. However, DC is not the only place where larger military confrontations are brewing up. Loyal Trump forces inside red states, with the support of countless militia groups, prepare to march towards key Biden strongholds like California and New York. The blue faction is scrambling to set up defenses around state and city lines, as they are preparing for the inevitable. They hoped that declaring open defiance would reveal cracks within the red faction. Now it is clear that the opposite is the truth. Trump's forces are looking scarily unified, with them having a clear goal in sight: crush the pro-Biden resistance and reclaim America for Donald Trump. By 10 p.m. the first pro-Trump army battalions arrive in Washington, D.C. They are met with thunderous cheers by the rioters while they make their way towards the Capitol. The first military confrontations happens at the intersection of Constitutional Avenue and 1st Street. A platoon of National Guard soldiers loyal to Biden, guarding the western approach of the Capitol, faced off against red forces led by John H. Smith. As the first directly faced each other, both sides remained hesitant to act. Then at 10:30 p.m. a single shot pierced the silence, setting off a chain reaction of gunfire that lights up the night sky. It is unclear who shot first, but it's now very clear that history is forever changed as the Battle of DC begins. Civil war is now certain. But before we dive into the first battle of the Second American Civil War, let me explain the two factions to you, so you can have a clear overview. After the open defiance of the blue state governors, it is now clear to anyone that America is headed for another civil war. How it will unfold is anyone's guess at this point, but one thing is very clear: who is fighting against whom. On one side you have the Trump administration trying to keep Trump in power, and on the other side you have the Biden coalition trying to remove Trump from power. For the sake of simplicity, I will be referring to these factions as the red and blue faction respectively. Anyway, while you might think that the factions are split along partisan lines, the reality is far more complex. Let's first talk about the red faction, aka the Trump administration. This faction is composed of Trump loyalists and supporters both from the public and within the government. Their core belief is that Trump is defending democracy from a corrupt system, being manipulated by elites, radicals, and the so-called deep state. Of course, Donald Trump is the leader of this faction, now ruling under martial law. Closely on his side are pro-Trump Republicans like Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott, the governors of Florida and Texas. In fact, those states and many other red states in the South and Midwest completely stand behind Donald Trump. Their state-owned National Guards are in full loyalty to Trump and their governors. Also on Trump's side are the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and many more right-wing militia groups. By now they are still holding the Capitol, with many important politicians like Mike Pence and Chuck Schumer being held hostage there. However, in the last 2 days, countless new members have joined these groups in support of Trump. They are well organized in rural and heavily conservative areas, ready to defend Trump to their death. Many of them are making active preparations to fight a guerrilla-style war, both in blue cities and on the red countryside. While the military itself is split, Trump commands a substantial number of loyal officers, especially the National Guard units in red states like Texas. Besides them, the Army and Marine Corps are largely loyal to Trump, unlike the Navy and Air Force. On top of that, the FBI and many local police forces support Trump. One faction I haven't mentioned so far is the Secret Service. While their numbers aren't too substantial, they are mostly loyal to Trump, as it is their duty to protect him. However, some members tasked with protecting Biden and Harris have defected from Trump. Geographically, the red faction is strong in the South, the rural Midwest, and mountain states. Their main bastions are Florida and Texas, with Trump for now residing in Florida. The biggest strength of the red faction is their control over critical resources, thanks to their geography. They hold oil and gas rich areas, ensuring that Trump's administration administration controls vital energy supplies. They also have control over vast amounts of food supplies, which could become crucial in a drawn-out conflict. But let's now talk about the blue faction, aka Biden's coalition. The opposing faction led by Joe Biden is composed of anti-Trump Republicans, Democrats and progressive leftists. Their primary goal is to restore constitutional democracy and end what they see as Trump's authoritarian coup. Their leader is Joe Biden, who they view as the rightful president of the US. Kamala Harris also plays a significant role, practically being the second in command after Biden. Other key figures include governors of blue states like Gavin Newsom in California, Andrew Cuomo in New York, and Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. But besides Democratic governors, some anti-Trump Republicans like Liz Cheney also align themselves with Biden. Like the Red movement has their rural militia groups, the blue faction has progressive movements in urban centers. For example, the still fairly fresh BLM movement or the Antifa. They are rapidly organizing, taking inspiration from the Hong Kong protesters a year earlier. Tech giants like Twitter, Google and Facebook also strongly align themselves with Biden, allowing him to use social media to his advantage. Finally, a significant portion of the higher military command, such as General Mark Milley and others, align themselves with Biden, providing him with considerable military strength. While the Army and Marine Corps is largely on Trump's side, both the Navy and Air Force are practically completely loyal to Joe Biden. Geographically, the blue faction controls the West Coast, the Northeast and urban areas around the nation. Their key states include California, New York and practically all of New England. This quickly reveals one of the Biden faction's greatest strengths, as they control a large chunk of the American economy. Many urban centers, Wall Street, Hollywood and the Silicon Valley all lay in their control. Thanks to the loyalty of tech companies, the blue factions also have superior communications channels. Before we continue with the battle for DC, I need to briefly mention the neutral factions. Mainly they are foreign powers like Russia, China and the EU, who are hesitant to support a side, since the situation is still so fresh. However, that can change very soon. Now with the lines drawn, let us resume the first clash of the American Civil War, the battle for DC. Whoever gains control over DC will gain a significant morale boost that could be the deciding factor in winning the war. The fight inside DC spreads like a wildfire. Pro-Trump rioters, emboldened by the arrival of the Red forces, begin to attack National Guard units near the Capitol. The streets of the nation's capital, once filled with tourists and workers, now are filled with the sounds of gunfire and explosions. The rioters, armed with makeshift weapons, grow bolder with every minute. While the main goal of the pro-Trump forces is to secure DC, they have another order, one far more urgent. Inside the Capitol, hundreds of Proud Boys, Oath Keepers and other rioters are trapped, with over 20 senators still being held as hostages. The Capitol, though internally controlled by the Red forces, has become a death trap. Surrounded by Biden-loyal National Guard units, any attempt to break out seems like suicide. Trump, watching the events unfold from Mar-a-Lago, gives the order to focus all efforts in securing the White House and liberating the Capitol. For him, this battle is personal. His loyalists must be freed, not only to boost their morale, but also because he needs the senators alive. If he gets a hold of them, he can trial them publicly to send a powerful message to both his supporters and the world. But it's not just the Capitol in play. Other key battleground areas include vital choke points like Constitutional Avenue, which cuts through the heart of DC, and the bridges spanning the Potomac River. Control over these key routes will determine who can move troops and supplies through the city. As the battles escalate from sporadic skirmishes to full-on warfare, the streets of DC descend into chaos. Militia groups, sensing the growing danger, scatter. What began as a political protest has developed into urban warfare. Tens of thousands of pro-Trump rioters and militia groups now roam the city, trying to figure out how they can aid the Red forces, but their lack of organization leaves them vulnerable. Residents of DC, fearing for their lives, band together in makeshift defense units, setting up roadblocks and barricades in a desperate attempt to protect their neighborhoods from the mob. Local businesses, schools and even churches are transformed into fortified positions, and the tensions thicken as the Red forces tighten their grip. The Biden coalition closely watches from a military bunker in Delaware. Their forces remain mostly intact, though shaken by the initial unrest. For now they have the upper hand, but only barely. Despite early chaos, Biden's forces have managed to set up defensive positions around the Capitol, motivated by Biden's speech and the defiance of Republican governors like Larry Hogan, who pledged loyalty to Biden. His defiance was crucial in aligning DC's National Guard with the Blue forces, giving Biden a solid foothold in the city. However, the Red forces have their own advantages. Trump can muster a large army over time, pulling from militia groups across the nation and mobilizing local army units in the US Army. His numbers are growing. The longer the fight drags on, the more reinforcements he can call in, a reality that weighs heavily on the minds of Biden's commanders. One of the Blue faction's greatest assets is the Air Force. Though the Navy is useless in the battle for DC, the pro-Biden Air Force has established a strict no-fly zone, preventing Trump from deploying air reinforcements or conducting aerial attacks. Drones and helicopters patrol the skies, maintaining air superiority. This opens the door for a high-risk, high-reward maneuver, a helicopter rescue of the trapped senators. It's a long shot, but Biden knows the political and psychological cost of losing the senators to Trump's forces would be catastrophic. As both sides sides dig in for a longer fight, the ground war rages. Urban combat is hellish with both National Guard and Red militias fighting for every street corner and building. Inside the capital, Red forces barricade themselves in hallways and chambers, using the building's architecture to their advantage. While they hear the battles raging on outside, the insurgents reinforce doorways with whatever they can find. Meanwhile, Biden's forces control the Potomac bridges and the key avenues leading to the capital. Constitutional Avenue in particular is a blood-soaked stretch of asphalt, with both sides pouring resources into its control. Armored vehicles from the National Guard slowly move down its length, facing waves of gunfire and Molotov cocktails. Civilians caught in the crossfire flee in terror, their homes turned into battlegrounds. The Potomac River itself becomes a critical dividing line. Whoever controls the bridges will dictate who can bring reinforcements into the city. But the chaos on the ground doesn't stop there. Throughout the city, militia groups supporting Trump attempt to coordinate their attacks with the formal Red forces. But disorganization reigns. Some groups refuse to take orders, preferring to act on their own, while others launch poorly timed assaults that only serve to weaken the overall Red effort. The militia groups may have numbers, but they lack the training and discipline of the National Guard. Many are gunned down in the streets of DC, their bodies left as grim reminders of the anarchy. It is now clear to the Biden coalition that now is the time to act. Every second they don't take actions, the chances of rescuing the senators become slimmer. At 11:25 p.m., Joe Biden makes his move. From the safety of his bunker in Delaware, he orders the National Guard to storm the Capitol. If Trump's forces get the senators out of DC, it would rally his base and cement his hold on power. A rescue mission is the only hope the senators have. It's a high-risk, high-reward gamble. But Biden had no choice. The National Guard begins its assault. Teams of guardsmen equipped with riot shields and automatic weapons storm the Capitol's main entrances. The fight is brutal, with Oath Keepers defending every inch of ground. The hallways become battlegrounds, echoing with the sounds of gunfire, explosion and the cries of the wounded. Flashbangs are tossed into rooms before the guardsmen enter, hoping to disorient the rioters inside. But the insurgents won't give up easily. They have waited too long for this moment to let it slip away. Outside the Capitol grounds are no better. The National Guard, trying to secure the perimeter, faced constant attacks from Trump's reinforcements. The fighting spills out onto lawns and monuments. Helicopters hover overhead, ready to extract the senators if the National Guard can break through, but the situation remains tense. Any mistake could cost lives. All the while, Biden and his generals are glued to their screens, watching the assault unfold in real time. They know that this is their moment. If they can pull off the rescue, it will be a devastating blow to Trump's forces. But if they fail, the consequences could be dire. Back in the Capitol, the tension reaches a new height. The pro-Trump forces are forced to retreat further and further. Inside the Senate chambers, Enrique Tarrio sets up a livestream that is quickly being watched by hundreds of thousands of viewers. You can barely hear him speak as shots and explosives are heard inside the Senate. He shows the tired faces of tied-up senators, like Mike Pence and Bernie Sanders, directly into the camera. He then speaks directly to Joe Biden. Biden, you traitor. This is on you, not us. You brought this. You can stop this. Stop this assault and the senators will live. But if one soldier sets foot inside the Senate chamber, we will execute all hostages. They are traitors, but they still deserve a fair trial. But if you force our hand, we shall be the deciders of their justice, and we will not hold back. We are ready to die for this cause. We and everyone in here will die for our country, for America. He then waves the camera towards several Proud Boys, all with handguns directly pointed at the hostages. They are only waiting for their boss's command. In Delaware, the Biden coalition is in disarray. Everyone is hastily arguing on what the best next step of action is. They quickly connect Joe Biden on a phone line to the leader of the National Guard forces inside DC. He directly orders the officer not to storm the Senate chambers. This order comes just in time, as only minutes later National Guard units arrive at the entrance to the chamber. Now a tense standoff is in action, as the gunshots and explosions in the Capitol slowly quiet down. Inside the chamber you have Enrique Tarrio live streaming to the whole world, while he repeatedly threatens to kill all senators. On the outside you have the National Guard, standing ready to follow any further order. While the National Guard are in a tense spot, they are trained professionals, unlike the Proud Boys, who stood under immense pressure for over 24 hours now. Inside the Senate chambers, you can see the tension in the air as Enrique Tarrio slowly begins to panic. While the National Guard waits for further commands, one of the Proud Boys guarding the entrance to the Senate makes a crucial mistake. He has his handgun drawn towards the door, ready to shoot if anyone should pass through. Like the other Proud Boys, he's completely on the edge, and as one particularly loud explosion echoes through the Capitol, he slips up and a single bullet leaves the barrel of his gun. The bullet only narrowly avoids the National Guard outside, who quickly return the fire. Now, as the National Guard is firing shots inside the Senate chamber, Enrique Tarrio gives the order. The Proud Boys aim their guns and fire one fatal shot each. Mike Pence, Bernie Sanders, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell and 20 other senators are now dead. People viewing Tarrio's livestream are unsure on what exactly is going on. In the chaos, they barely saw what happened and only got a glimpse of the dead senators as Tarrio dropped the camera, while bullets hail through the room. It is unclear who shot first. Now the Proud Boys all take cover and fire towards the entrance, which quickly gets blown open by the National Guard. Soldiers storm inside and quickly overwhelm the rioters. Enriquetario is shot in the shoulder, but he survives and is taken hostage, like several other high-ranking Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. The National Guard soldiers, upon eliminating the threat from the insurgents, quickly check on the senators. Unfortunately, not one survived, as they all got hit with a single bullet directly to the head. Biden and his advisors are left speechless. It doesn't take long for the National Guard to clear out the capital, and by 2 AM it is under their firm control. However, both the fight in DC and the larger conflict aren't over. Both sides are trying their very best to leverage the situation to their control. For both sides, it feels like they lost. While Trump's faction is celebrating the death of the senators, they lost by now iconic figures in the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers and co. who stormed the Capitol. Also, the inability to protect the Capitol isn't a sign of great strength either. The Blue faction, on the other hand, has to live with the knowledge that they made a bad call. They could have acted sooner or with more caution. Tensions about Biden's ability to lead begin to rise within his coalition. Both factions managed to use the situation fairly effectively to their advantage through various propaganda channels. Fox News reports on the betrayal of the National Guard, which led to the death of the senators. They mourn the captured and killed insurgents, who are now seen as martyrs. CNN and co. report on the brutal assassination of senators by Trump's forces. They also report on the symbolic victory Biden's forces achieved by reconquering the Capitol. The population is left even more traumatized and divided as the preparations for further conflict continue. The battle for DC is still raging on, with Blue forces slowly but steadily retreating. Donald Trump and his forces know that their best chance for victory are swift and hard strikes. They have the advantage on the ground, and the longer the conflict drags on, the more Biden can exploit his advantage in the economy and intelligence field. US Army units begin to mass assemble in many red areas in preparations for a wave of attacks. Soon the red forces will strike again. The success of their attacks will change the fate of America forever. While the battle for Washington DC is still raging on, the red forces have laid their eyes on a new target. They know that quick and decisive strikes are critical to boost their morale and ensure that Trump's administration has a good chance to win. However, Blue forces are stronger than anticipated in many areas. They have crushed practically all red resistance in the Pacific states and the Northeast, their two main strongholds. However, one blue state is looking particularly vulnerable: Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, has declared her full support for Joe Biden, and the National Guard of Michigan largely follows her orders. However, pro-Trump units within their ranks conduct several small skirmishes. Michigan is a swing state that voted for Donald Trump in 2016. A large chunk of the rural population is in full support of Donald Trump, and cities in Michigan, mainly Detroit, experience guerrilla-style attacks by red militia groups. Michigan is a state with a history of active militia groups like the Wolverine Watchmen. These groups could be key in providing support for an offensive by the red forces. On top of that, the National Guard in Michigan is constantly occupied with fighting small skirmishes, so they struggle to build sufficient defenses. Donald Trump's forces also are in close proximity to Michigan, as both Ohio and Indiana are under their control. On January 10, US Army troops loyal to Donald Trump begin assembling in Ohio and Indiana, close to the Michigan border. They are not tasked with actually starting an offensive themselves, but rather they train and organize local militia groups. These groups are then sent towards Detroit, where they have different small objectives. The goal is not to capture the city directly, but to cause chaos and strain the strength of the National Guard. The US Army doesn't train them in sync, but rather gives small militia units different objectives, like destroying infrastructure, disrupting supply lines, and so on. While the militia groups are covertly moving into Detroit in waves, the battle for DC is still raging on. Right now, it is the only large-scale military confrontation in the US. The whole world is closely watching the events in DC unfold. Whoever will win in DC will most likely gain international support, as the world wants to side with the winning faction. Nobody is even glancing towards Michigan by this point. Across the US, the violence has actually mostly calmed down, at least compared to the first few days. By now, the dividing lines are clearer, and both red and blue forces located in enemy territory wait for a chance to strike instead of blindly attacking. By now, rioters on both sides have organized themselves into militia-like groups, and their objectives have shifted. Instead of protesting, they now conduct guerrilla warfare-style attacks. This is especially damaging for Biden's coalition, since guerrilla warfare is very effective in cities, and he controls many large urban centers across the nation. Trump's control over Washington DC slowly tightens as Biden is struggling to amass troops to send down the city. The main issue is that the blue forces across the nation prepare for a defensive strategy. No governors want to give up crucial units to capture DC, as they would rather protect their states. Biden's Air Force, however, is extremely effective in slowing down any advances by the red forces towards the capital. But after around a week of fighting, it is clear to the Biden coalition that DC is a lost cause. They simply can't match the manpower the army and local militias provide to Donald Trump. However, they found a strategy to turn the fighting in DC into effective propaganda. Trump's units suffer far higher casualties while killing several civilians in the process. Videos out of DC of Trump supporters fighting against residents and the army destroying neighborhoods serve as crucial motivation for the blue forces' morale. While DC is turning into hell, another city is experiencing increased violence: Detroit. By January 20, almost 15,000 Red militia units are fighting a guerrilla war in Detroit against the National Guard. The local communities in Detroit suffer heavily as the militia groups are not holding back from attacking them. Thanks to Biden's strong control over intelligence in the nation, his faction is aware about the large number of Red forces assembling in Ohio and Indiana. However, they are unaware about the scale on their involvement in the attacks on Detroit. Biden's advisors make the miscalculation that Trump's forces are preparing for an assault towards the northeast. They assume that Trump plans to attack Pennsylvania to then move towards New Jersey and finally New York and Delaware. This move would cut the blue northeast in two and diminish any hopes of winning DC. If the Red forces would indeed attempt such an offensive and succeed, they would have practically won the war. Paranoid of this prospect, Biden's forces heavily fortified those areas. They shift their focus from winning in DC towards defending the northeast, a desperate call, but more and more reports about the sheer manpower of the Red forces in Ohio and Indiana pour in. A large chunk of Biden's entire forces are assembled in the northeast. Their first line of defense lies between Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Meanwhile, the situation in Detroit is further deteriorating. By the 25th of January, around 25,000 militia units are actively fighting against the National Guard in and around Detroit. This forces Gretchen Whitmer to draw the National Guard in Michigan away from defending the border and towards aiding Detroit. This leaves a critical flank open. By now, 8,000 out of the 10,000 highly trained National Guard units of Michigan are fighting to secure Detroit. On top of that, a large number of blue militia groups are active in Detroit, plus the entire industrial output of Detroit is focused on aiding Biden's coalition. This now turns Detroit into an important yet incredibly vulnerable target. On January 26 at 11 p.m, Donald Trump gives the order. His forces are now tasked with first encircling and then capturing Detroit. The first Red units to cross the Michigan border are around 800 specially trained Marine Corps units. They quickly establish control over key highways, allowing broader masses of troops to move into Michigan. From Fort Wayne and Toledo, 25,000 US Army units and 10,000 Ohio National Guard units rush into Michigan. Inside Delaware, everybody quickly realizes what's going on. Biden's team panics on how to best respond to the attack and how they can save Michigan. Biden immediately begins appealing to Canada in an attempt to evacuate the Michigan National Guard out of Detroit through Canada. He finds no success as Canada fears the war would spill onto their border. Biden immediately puts significant numbers of the Air Force towards Michigan. Fighter jets, helicopters and swarms of drones engage in fighting with the Red forces rapidly approaching Detroit. The army is prepared, however, and their own airplanes and anti-air weapons put up a decent fight. However, the sheer strength of Biden's Air Force slows them down significantly while inflicting heavy casualties. However, it's not enough to save Detroit. Everyone on Biden's inner circle knows that they need to take decisive action now. They're on the path to lose Washington. If they also lose Detroit, the blue morale most likely wouldn't recover. Inside Detroit, the National Guard and blue militias are already exhausted, but they put up heavy resistance. They disperse and engage in guerrilla-style warfare, using their knowledge of the city to their advantage. However, it is only a matter of time before Detroit falls. Can Biden's coalition respond in time? Could losing DC and Detroit mean losing the Civil War? Does Biden even have a chance to turn the tide of war back in his favor? For these answers, you will have to wait for the next part of America Burns. If you enjoy watching longer form videos, I'm pleased to announce that once I finish this series, I will release a movie-length cut featuring all episodes in order. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If yes, please consider liking and subscribing. It would help my channel a lot. Also, you can comment below what you think will happen in the next episode. And while you wait for the next part, you might want to check out some of my other videos. On the left is one about a timeline where Dick Cheney's daughter is straight, not a lesbian. I know that sounds absolutely absurd, but trust me, the implications of that are far greater than you might think. On the right is a bit of a shorter scenario about how East and West Germany never unite thanks to a brutal East German dictator taking over in the 80s. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.